You hear that all the time, like it's jumping off a cliff and building your wings on the way down. Like you probably hear that metaphor 1,000 times over. But to us, it's like, yeah, it's a leap, but it's really about kind of breaking into the smallest steps and just taking the next step. Right? First thing, grow a bucket. What do we do with that? Let's walk to 5 restaurants. That happens. And just kind of breaking everything down in the smallest steps, and that kind of adds up to something over time. But you just, so often I feel like we create this fear around starting something because we overhype it as like this one big decision. It's like, just break it down and it makes it easier. It feels like a marriage. It is a marriage. It's you. We work together it's been, every single morning you spend most of your waking hours with this person. We kind of soulmate, business soulmate, call it what it is. I feel like picking your co-founder is one of the most important, probably the most important decision you can ever make in a business. And I can't imagine not starting something with somebody else either. I feel like it's probably the first step of starting something is like, can you convince somebody else to join your idea? And if not, it's probably a bigger problem. And because there's so much power in collaboration. But it takes a lot of work, right? Like it's just like any relationship, and in a business when you have even other, so many different pressures, you have to work at it. And Alex and I, we talk a lot about this one idea, which kind of always rises to the top. It's just like speak like you're right and listen like you're wrong, and really embracing that. But it has to all come down to like a super deep sense of like respect and trust, and it's trust that that person's values are absolutely aligned, and then B, trust, like to me, Alex is the smartest guy I ever met. So when we disagree, that trust is like, all right, we may disagree totally, but I know he's coming from the exact same place, and I know he knows everything and more than I do. So what's the truth in what he's saying, right? And it's just trying to always build upon that. And I think if you can have that, it's amazing, and it's the most special thing about our whole journey and our whole company to me. So. I think it's not just even, there's actually a quote that comes to mind but if you guys haven't, anyone here read Jeff Bezos, his like annual shareholder letter? Is anyone here, if you like one thing you read after today, go Google it. It's one of the most just inspiring letters, and read the one he published this April. And it'll teach you more about business than in like one page than most other things you'll read. But he talks about this idea, and it's not just for co-founders, like anybody in a company, is like how important speed is. And you guys can get, you can get stuck just disagreeing in meetings and things like that. And it's like this idea of being able to say, because of the trust, that I disagree, but I commit and I'm all in. And he has this phrase like disagree but commit. And he's like, you know what, sometimes you just gotta like, I disagree, but I'm all in. And that second piece is the one that's so important, because you can never have like, I told you so, or what about this? Like once you say commit, you're committed. You may disagree, and at some point you just gotta trust and go with it. And I love that line he says, and he said that's one of the secrets to Amazon is like the pace they can move at. Because like if we're stuck, someone just, to be able to have the confidence and humility to say disagree, but let's try it out. I think what the common connection from a mission standpoint for all of us, like every single product to us, is all about, does this kind of further our mission of reconnecting families to their food? So for us, it's either we want families to grow it themselves, or you can't always grow it. So if you're buying our cereals or other snacks and ready-to-eat products, we're going to tell you exactly where it comes from. And it's that idea of like every one of our products has that educational discovery sense. We want to kind of reconnect another generation back to where their food comes from, and that's the common theme. And we started off in the produce aisle, and then realized that the same values of simplicity, of transparency, we could apply them to the grocery aisle, and it led us to breakfast cereal. And we love the idea too of like universality of like, how do we design indoor gardening kits that anyone can grow, like kids or adults. We kind of talk about this idea of like the Pixar of food, and love that idea of like, you walk into these Pixar movies, and whether you're 8 or like you're 38, right, you both walk out smiling, and it might be for different reasons, but it's designed for everybody. So we kind of love that that was one of our visions and our goals for the indoor gardening kits. And then that's what kind of we loved about cereal too. It's one of those just universal foods that it's the first thing kids eat when they're, the first thing they're cooking, mixing milk and cereal. And I mean, all of us are still eating cereal, and so we love that kind of the same kind of audience we could reach with it as well. But I think every step of the way, we've had people, when we started off with a mushroom kit and then went to a fish tank, I can't tell you how many people were like, what are you guys doing, launching a fish tank? You're a mushroom company, right? And you know, even going from there then to cereal, imagine that leap. But I think what makes it fun is just as long as you're staying true to like your core vision and like why you're doing everything. And I don't know if you guys ever seen, there's this TED talk by Simon Sinek on like the why and the what and the how, right? You stay true to your why, like everything else will kind of, the what of what you're doing will kind of wrap itself together. But if you change like why you're doing something, that's when stuff starts falling apart. And you see a lot of companies that'll do that. And if your values change, that's I think when you get in trouble. Schools has probably been the most, like, by far the most rewarding piece of this journey. So about a year, actually exactly a year ago, because we're going into our second school year, last August we got the contract for New York City, the largest school district in the country, and replaced Kellogg's to now feed 1.1 million kids with our cereal. And it's the first organic cereal like ever served in public schools. About a third of the sugar is what the kids were eating. And the coolest part was that kids chose them off of blind taste tests. And like that, the fact that like kids are leading this movement, and like it just shows the power of like, take away the labels, take away the marketing, and like let kids speak for themselves what they want. And you kind of realize in food at least, this whole like preconception around what kids will eat or should eat, you know, like highly processed, they need sugar, it's got to be refined. Like that's just so much of that is just like the big CPG food companies putting that out there in the world and training us to think that. But it was so cool to see, like, you take the labels off, kids choosing 100% stone milled, you know, organic cereal. And so that just like that impact and the power of that. And now we're taking that case study to as many districts as we can. So we're launching in Austin and Dallas and Boulder right now this back to school season, and working on Berkeley and Oakland. So trying to just take that case study. So that's been really fun. Yeah, you know, I think it was one of the biggest lessons we learned was when we were doing the mushroom kits ourselves, and it was this idea of just you can't do everything yourself, and find partners who are better at things than you are. And I remember like we learned that when we were used to grow our own mushroom kits, and there was this other farm in Sebastopol, and I remember they came by once like, hey, we think we can do this stuff for you guys, and they brought by like a month later their versions of our kits, and they were just incredibly better. They grew better. They were just like, and it's one of the most like humbling moments. You're like, man, we spent 2.5 years doing this, and we just got our butts kicked, right? But at the same time, it was so freeing, and like wow, like let's find people like that for all of our products and parts of our company that we don't have to be experts at. And so for like now, what helps with the supply chain is that like we kind of work in this co-man model. So we're buying these units pretty much as finished goods, which simplifies it for us. But it's on the cereal side, it is one of the trickier things of just sourcing organic, and we're doing biodynamic. So that's one of the trickier parts about the supply chain, because it's not a commodity which you can kind of buy in bulk at any time. And so that is one of the bigger challenges on the cereal side. There's a lot of regulation there, but I think that those pieces goes back to like finding the right partners, but the sourcing of it, because for us, the whole food system as country is built off of a lack of transparency and the commoditization of food. So trying to break that mold and be able to tell you guys exactly what farmer we bought this cocoa from, this wheat from, that's a challenge. And forecasting as a small brand, we don't have 50 years of sales history trying to predict like, hey, we think we're going to use 100,000 bushels of corn. Like one change of account can swing it like this, and that's a tricky part. And but we kind of baked it into, that's also like why we're here. So. Yeah, it's still one of our, it's a top 3 goal for us as a company. Is we know there's still so much efficiencies to find in our current supply chain. And I mean, you talk about most in the CPG world where most of your cash goes, 60-70% goes to your raw materials. And so if there's one place, like you can try to find all the efficiencies in your sales and marketing and everything else, but 5% savings here is what really goes straight to your bottom line. And so it's a huge focus always, and so often as a small brand, like especially being a social enterprise, like you gotta, you're always gonna fight in some way for your unfair share of attention, right? As a small brand, and whether you're freight carriers and you have to almost, like for us, we treat selling and working with our suppliers just like an account, like that same level of follow-ups and passion and selling and giving, like when something exciting happens, not just selling it at Whole Foods, it's like, hey, UPS rep, check out what just happened. And like, it's just treating your cost of goods and your suppliers as important as a buyer. And so often it's easy to prioritize your buyers because you see the check coming in from them, but the folks who are also helping you build it is as important. And I think it's a lesson we're still learning every day, like just how you can't ever not focus enough on that. There's always more to do. And but early on too, for us in our supply chain, it was just trying to get creative too, because there's so many at a small scale ways to, we talk about like wasted resources that other people have. And when we first built our coffee grounds is one thing, like our first display racks, right? We used to build out these display racks for Home Depot where we shipped our products in. And it can cost $30 to $40 worth of wood to build these. And we're driving by Home Depot and you just see stacks and stacks of pallets. And we remember we went there one day, like, hey, what do you guys do with these? Like, oh, they go to some recycling lumber yard. We're like, hey, can we just take these back? And we probably saved tens of thousands of dollars in the course of a year or two, just picking up their recycled wood that there was, who knows where it was going, and breaking it up and building our display racks from it. And like, there's so many examples like that of things out there. And also, you can, the idea of like, don't let perfect get in the way of good, and just get it out there. And it wasn't the most beautiful rack. It probably had some sharp edges and but to start off, it worked. Right? Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the CPG challenges. You're working off of, unless you're e-com, you're often working off of net 30, net 60, net 90 payment terms. And that's one of the beauties of trying to build an e-com business that also can support that, or a subscription where you can get paid at the same time or faster. But for us, the financing early on of trying to find banks who could kind of get us working lines and that kind of credit to be able to finance that was a big hurdle. And again, it always is kind of making sure we can extend that, because you can only grow as fast as really your working line. We're at 17 folks now. So we're based in Oakland and Jack London Square. And then so 17 in the office, and then a host of kind of co-manufacturers we work with. Most of our team now is here in Oakland. I think that the two biggest pieces in our team is, more than the most important thing in a company, and it's not products, it's not your profit, it is your people, and ultimately, it's actually one of the coolest feelings. So you sit around a room and for us, 16 people in the company meetings, and you take that moment and just kind of stop and pause for a second and realize, like, wow, everything that this brand is and represents and the impact it can make is just the collective energy between a small group of people in this little room. And you can look everyone in the eye and you're like, man, the energy and how well we can all collaborate, everything, it's just, the power of that and that manifestation is just, it's one of the coolest feelings, especially like in our weekly company meetings, to feel that. And like we kick it off always like just a minute of silence to kind of feel that, and it's like, all right, this is it. This is our small team. Yeah. That's all we have. We have each other, and A, like that underlying trust, and I think B, such a huge part of it is transparency as much as possible. Something Alex and I try to strive for, and I feel like as a team, obviously you hire people who have shared the same vision and the same values, and that's the core. But I think just like anything else, everything relies on trust, and so fostering that as much as possible. And I think the best way to do that is just by being a uber transparent company. And so it's something we try to foster. And I think it's been one of our biggest learnings of like what creates a good culture, because ultimately it's everyone's it's just the people you have right there in that small room. So we might as well be on the same page. Yeah, that hasn't. No, we have it's a fun routine. Alex picks me up. We live pretty close to each other. We carpool into work. Picks me up at 6:45 every morning. Hasn't changed for years, and we drive back home together at like 8:30, 8:45, and it's just it's fun. It makes enjoy it. So, but it does. It's there's this idea too of like as this the former CEO of Coke had this really cool metaphor. He said, and he's like, life is all about juggling these 5 balls: work, family, friends, health, and spirit. And happiness is really how well you can juggle those, right? And it's just a constant balance. So like, yeah, we put in a lot of work, but you have to make sure you're balancing those other 4 things, because if not, it's not sustainable. But I love that kind of idea, like these 5 balls you're constantly juggling, and just have to define it for yourself, like what's the right level. Yeah, it's so I'm assuming you're speaking of the cereal side, on the competition side. So, you know, it is on. It's actually funny because we air, and I didn't bring the multi-serve cartons because we do that more explicitly on that. But on our cereal cartons, we actually is one of the most fun things. We put the exact recipe on the box itself, right? And that's just one of our core values. Like we really believe one of the reasons we went into food was that we don't believe food should be patented. We think that's like food is the most personal thing there is. You should know exactly who made it, how it was made. So we actually put the exact recipe on our box of how to make this cereal at home. And people thought we were crazy, but we're like, that's the only way we're going to get into food is if we make it the most transparent possible. So really what we're selling then is trust and transparency, right? And that's our bet, is that people really want, like you think like, what is a brand in food? A brand is really just it's a symbol that gets you to trust something faster, right? And so for us, we're betting not on some proprietary technology or ingredient made in a lab. We're just betting on we're going to be the brand that consumers trust the most, and we're going to do everything we can to get to that point. And I think and I would love if Kellogg's would change their packaging and transparency and tell you exactly how they make their cornflakes. Like I would love if that. I would, you know, challenge them to do that, and that'd be a win. I would consider that a win for everybody, right? But but realistically, these guys those are massive ships to move, right? R&D cycles, and imagine, and we created our products with this transparent supply chain. It's a lot harder to kind of take a non-transparent supply chain and try to turn it this way. So I hope that happens, because one of our goals is like inspiring this food industry to move towards this direction. But I think it's more about trust than things that should be patented. Natural organics are in about 11 or 12% year over year right now. Like traditional CPG is flatlining, if not declining in some categories. And you know, natural organic food space is just about across $100 billion. So it's becoming a sizable chunk of growth in the CPG space. So it's cool. It's really fun to see. I think it's like the sad truth, I guess, that there's no secret to it, right? It's just a matter of outreach, and I'll say that it's a matter of putting yourself out there. And I gave you that example of one of the first blog posts about the company. I remember emailing probably 500 different writers, right? And one got back to us. And I remember it's a Fast Company blog. That was 1 out of 500, right? Kickstarter. So we had a Kickstarter campaign for this. We had a $100,000 goal for 30 days, ended up hitting $250,000 in 30 days to launch this. A lot of it was based off of amazing kind of mentions in different articles and websites and magazines. But just like with this too, that was 3 weeks before that, 24/7, just emailing thousands of people, calling thousands of people, sharing your story. And you just when we walked in, our first sale was Whole Foods Market, right? But we've told that story a lot of how we walked into Whole Foods with a bucket of mushrooms and they became our first customer. What's often not talked about is that we went to Safeway, Berkeley Bowl. I mean, probably a dozen other grocery stores that said, with these 2 crazy kids growing mushrooms in a fraternity. And thank God Seth's at the Whole Foods Produce, like his eyes lit up and he got us, and he's like, hey, let's talk to Randy, and it kind of went from there. But I think early on, so much of it is just not quitting and like really being excited about the fact and like owning it that I'm going to get told no 499 times, but damn well I'm going to keep on going until I hit the 1,000th time, That's like honestly the only secret there is. And if you're actually passionate about it, people are going to see that, and that's going to be your best test, is do you actually keep on going after the first few no's. But it's not much more than that. It's just a hustle. It's a good question. I think it's interesting given where we're all at right now, the technology we have around us, right? I think number one, there's no excuse anymore to say, I don't know, right? We all have, we taught ourselves how to grow mushrooms on YouTube, right? And started a mushroom farm off of that. And there's the entire world's at our fingertips now. So there's no excuse to say like, I don't know about this industry, but at the same time, you can't get caught in that, and I think you have to have the humility of realizing also I don't know what I don't know. And there's so much power and experience. And then you brought up like mentorship, like that's probably the biggest thing that's actually like gotten us to where we're at is, and people like John Foraker at Annie's, like he gave it, like one of the most incredible people, because he gave so much just to mentor and to help us out, and he grew, you know, a few $100 million CPG brand that sold to General Mills and went IPO, and just took the time out of his day to keep on giving back and mentoring. Like the lessons we learned from that was incredible, and we'll knock on every door to try to get a nugget from somebody. And you talk about Plum Organics too, like Neil, they're like amazing people who gave back so much, and like we learned so much from. And it's funny because you have like new businesses. The other like piece that we've learned is that what you're doing may be different, whether it's cryptocurrencies now or mushrooms or whatever it is, it might be different, but like the fundamentals of business are ultimately the same, and that's been one of the biggest learnings for me. And people have done and faced every single issue you faced for 100 years now in this same economic model. And whether it's supply chain, financing, cash flow, it's the same ultimate issues you're dealing with. And yeah, your widget's different, but that's been a big learning for us. And like it's just, and it's up to you to try to not make the same mistakes again. And if we do, the onus is on us, and we've made the same mistakes other people have. And I wish I'd spent more time understanding that. But it's all out there, and ultimately the business is business in so many different ways. So I would just push you to try to knock as many doors as possible, as get feedback. I'm sure you guys have heard this kind of data, but like the idea itself is 1% and execution is 99%. You guys have probably all heard that in some different form factor, and it's so true. And I remember even, an example, and I go back to this Kickstarter campaign. We had worked for months with this amazing industrial design company, came up with the first home aquaponics system, and we had this kind of like what do we do with it? Do we go out try to fundraise privately for it? And ultimately decided to put on Kickstarter, but there was there was an anxiousness to it because you're putting out your idea in the world months before you're actually ready to launch it, and people can see it and learn all your designs. And but like the amount of learnings we got from putting that out in the world, like thousands of comments of like, hey, what about this? What about that? Like, I'm so glad we didn't put out that first thing. We'd have been out hundreds of thousands of dollars on like faulty molds and things like that. And even like, one of the biggest, I would say if you have an idea, the opposite is true of like, go out and literally say, I'm gonna talk to 200 people over the next month. And like A, you might find a co-founder. B, if you're as excited after that 200th conversation as you were in the first conversation, it probably means it's something you're actually passionate about, and you're gonna get so much feedback that's guaranteed it's gonna change your business model for the better just based on real life examples. And the 0.001% chance that you meet somebody who's going to actually try to take your idea and run with it versus like guaranteed 100% that you're going to get amazing feedback, find partners, it's just not even close, like the trade-off, And I'd say if you're not willing to do that, this probably isn't the right thing for you to do in terms of starting something. There's different levels of transparency. There's some companies, I forget that you might have heard this story, a company that made salaries public. I forget the brand that was, but
UC Berkeley? Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Oh yeah, UC Berkeley. Yeah, it's technically right. So there's a line for everybody, right? Like there's some things we say, hey, we're not gonna. There's private, and other things like company financials and our P&L and our balance sheet. Like that's something our whole team looks at because we want everyone to know exactly the health of the business and where we're at. And so there's a spectrum, I guess. There's definitely a spectrum, and you'll see some brands that take it to one total extreme and some that are totally, locked boxes. And it's kind of finding what you're comfortable with, but I just try to say err on this side as much as possible because I think at least I've always seen better things always come out of going that direction than the other direction. So, short answer to how do you create a lot of work. There's no small team. That means it's a lot of hours, a lot of work, and trying to find similarities as much as possible in supply chain and selling. Like we often now sell this whole program as one rack, as an indoor gardening, one sale to a customer. So we're not trying to sell 10 different things. It's like, hey, here's your rack. So it's trying to find the similarities and the efficiencies, but It's not easy, I'll tell you that much. Biodynamic it's one of the most fun things. It's like that we started looking at food and organic, and I don't know how many people here have heard about biodynamic. It's like the precursor to organic. I mean, this is over 120 years ago. This guy Rudolf Steiner started talking about treating a farm as an organism, and that's where the word organic came out of. And it was in response to like the industrialization of farming, and it's in some way it's like the purest form of organic. There's no outside fertilizers, no other. It's a whole closed loop farm, and we just found as a brand that's committed to sustainability and telling you where your food comes from and simplicity. That was the ultimate. So it's actually the first biodynamic cereal in the United States. So it was fun kind of putting that together. So it's our 10 years, this idea of like people overestimate what you can do in a year and you underestimate what you can do in 10 years. Just a concept that's always really stood out to us, and it's just something to keep in mind, because when you're starting something, you can get you have this grand vision, but then you're just dealing with it step by step, and it's a concept to keep in mind. Most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what you can do in a decade. So there's a real power to longevity and sticking at it. But I think where we see ourselves, I mean, ultimately we want to build a brand that lasts and that outlives Alex or myself or our team, and that's what drives us. It's like, how do you create a brand that can have that kind of impact and reach and can outlive us? And in some way, it's like, what would a Kraft Foods, right, look like if it started today by our generation, focused on transparency, not just efficiencies of manufacturing margin, and what would it look like with a focus on kids and health first, right? Not just ultimate scale. And it's like, I love these kind of questions of what would it look like if you could start over and start from scratch and build that new food company. And ultimately, it's just, we want to reach, there's 350, a million people in America. How do we get every single family growing their own food and connecting to it? And we got a long way to go. So that's what drives us. It's trying to reach every person we can.